Welcome back, everyone. It's me again, reading from one of my favorite books, Cabin on Trouble Creek by Jean Van Leeuwen. We left off yesterday at the end of chapter 1. Today I'll read chapter 2, maybe chapter 3, depending on how much time it takes me to read chapter 2. So just a quick review. The story takes place in 1803 in what Daniel and Will, the two main characters, brothers of the story, are in the new state of Ohio. That's where it takes place. I think I lost my train of thought there, but anyhow, you get what I mean. Dan and Will, two brothers, the main characters, are with their pa in the new state of Ohio in this time period of 1803. They've come from their original state, which was Pennsylvania. That's where they live with Pa, and later you'll find out who else. And Pa and Dan and Will are here in this area of the United States, in this new state of Ohio, claiming their land that Pa purchased last spring. And he plans to build a cabin and ultimately a farm. And he's brought Dan and Will, his two sons, to help him get started. When we left off yesterday at the end of chapter 1, Dan, the eldest of the two brothers, was noticing that this area that they're in is really, really compact and full of trees, and he calls it a dense wooded area. The trees are tight and large, and if you look up, you can't really see the sky because the canopy of leaves and branches blocks it out almost entirely. And it's hard for the sun to get through. And he feels like there's an eerie silence in this part of the land that they're in. And he says to Pa, when Pa tells them his dream of building a farm, he says, "But what about all these trees, Pa?" And Pa says, "We're going to chop them down." And here begins chapter 2. They started the next day. First thing they needed, Pa said, was a lean-to for shelter till they got their cabin built. He took his axe and cut down some thin saplings. He found 2 forked branches and stuck the ends into the ground, laying a crosspiece between. Along this crosspiece, Daniel and Will piled more saplings sloping down to the ground. And then they stacked up brush on the sides and more on top. And by mid-morning, they had a 3-sided shelter to keep off the rain. It was barely big enough for the 3 of them, and Pa couldn't quite sit upright, but he said it would do. Pa rolled a fair-sized log across the front. He gathered together some dry leaves and twigs and struck a spark with his flint on a bit of charred cloth and blew on it until it smoked and finally burst into a tiny red flame. "We'll keep a fire going day and night," he told them. "That'll scare off any wood varmints." And though they scarcely needed it for warmth these late summer days, Daniel was glad for the fire between them and whatever creatures might be out there among the trees. He and Will emptied out the packs old Ben had carried and lined up their supplies at the front of the lean-to: the large sack of cornmeal, the small one of salt, a few potatoes, and a near-empty jar of molasses, the big iron pot, and the small frying pan. Her spider, Ma called it, on account of its sitting up on 3 legs in the fire. If Ma were here, Daniel thought, she'd have this rough lean-to cozied up so it felt like home in no time at all. But Ma was back in Pennsylvania, waiting for the cabin to be finished before she and the 4 little ones joined them. His little sister Sarah just turned 6, and Abby 5. They did everything together. Zeke, only 3, but trying to do whatever Daniel and Will did, falling down and scrambling right up again. And the new baby, born in the early summer. Josiah, he was called, after Pa's oldest brother. Could be Pa was thinking of them too. He stopped only to eat some cold Johnny cake before picking up his axe again. I have in mind a likely spot for our cabin, he told Daniel and Will. And once more the 2 boys followed him through the trees. Elm, oak, and sugar maple, Daniel saw. Beech, walnut, hickory, and here and there a slender dogwood. Those were only some of the trees in this unending forest. Others Daniel hadn't come across before and didn't know their names. Pa took them to a small rise not far from the creek. Pa shook his head. You boys build up the fire. Have the kettle ready to boil when I get back. Will's face fell, but he didn't say any more. If Daniel told him to do something, he'd be sure to argue. But you didn't argue with Pa. When he made up his mind to something, his face turned hard, but it was no use trying to sway him. In just a few steps, Pa was gone, swallowed up by the shadowy trees. Their towering trunks seemed to press closer around the lean-to as daylight faded and quiet settled over the woods again. And once more, Daniel felt a sharp little prickle inside his chest. What if something should happen to Pa? What if he didn't come back? What would they do? Will didn't seem to have these kinds of thoughts. Already he was busy poking at the fire with a long stick, and as the coals began to glow, Will fed them with bits of dry twigs, and soon little flames were licking upward. A good fire was what they needed, Daniel thought. Fire would keep away the wood varmints, keep the 3 of them safe, so he hurried to gather fallen branches and feed the flames. And even after their fire was burning bright and steady, he kept piling more dead wood next to the lean-to. By the time Pa returned, water was beginning to bubble in the iron pot. He dropped a small bundle on the ground. Rabbit, he said with a rare smile. Daniel skinned it, cutting the meat into chunks with his knife and dropping it into the pot. Soon the lean-to was filled with the good smell of rabbit stew, and it made him think of Ma. Of course, her rabbit stew would be full of other savory things. Wild mushrooms, onions, carrots, a pinch of this or that herb from her garden. Still, this plain stew smelled mighty fine. When they finished eating it, mopping out the pot with the last scraps of Johnny cake, the 3 of them stretched out to sleep. There was just room enough in the lean-to for them to lie side by side, if no one rolled over. And Pa's feet, well, they about reached the fire. Good night, boys, he said, and in a minute he was breathing deeply. Daniel felt snug lying between Pa and his little brother Will in the tight little shelter that they had built. His stomach was full of rabbit stew. Fire still flickered brightly between him and the dark towering trees. And he was about to doze off when he heard the sound. It was eerie, a slowly rising cry that went on, and then hung in the air like something not of this world. And now it came again, but from a different part of the forest. Long and drawn out and mournful. It sent a shiver creeping up his spine. Daniel clutched at Pa's arm until he came awake with a start. What is it? Pa sat up on his elbows, reaching for his gun, and then he laid back down. "Ah, it's just wolves," he said. So it was true. There were wolves in the forest. Inside his head, Daniel could see them, lifting their sharp noses to howl at the night sky. Gray and ghost-like shapes circling closer and closer through the trees. "It's all right," Pa told him, his voice softer. "They won't attack us. They only go after the weak and the wounded. We have our fire." Daniel stared into the fire's red glow. That fire was a comfort, no doubt about it. It warmed him inside and out. And in a moment, Pa went off to sleep again. And finally, Daniel did too. But in his dreams, gray, ghost-like shapes floated among the trees, their unearthly cries echoing in the night. The end of chapter 2. And we'll begin again tomorrow with chapter 3. I hope that you are enjoying this book as much as I am enjoying reading it to you. And now it's time for you to go and brush those teeth, because I know that you have been eating lots of sugar. I know that you have been eating so much candy from that Halloween bag that your parents tried to hide from you and eat themselves. Yeah, parents like candy too. So you need to go brush your teeth. Make sure you're doing really good brushes, like setting on a timer for like 5 minutes. Don't brush too hard. Now don't press hard. You just lightly brush, and you got to start. You got to do it in a pattern. You got to start somewhere. So I like to start actually on the upper teeth in the back, and I brush the top of my teeth. Then I go to the outside of my teeth. Then I go back to the top, and I go to the inside. And then I move right along until I go all the way around the whole top part of my mouth, doing that same thing, inside, top, outside. And then I go to the bottom, and I do the same thing. I always start on this side, do a pattern all the way around. And then I do my tongue. Yes, I always brush my tongue. Your tongue has all those taste buds in it, and those things can make your breath smell bad. So you got to brush your tongue and the roof of your mouth. You got to brush the roof of your mouth too. And when you're all done, you'll have the nicest, freshest breath in the whole entire world, unless you drink a lot of coffee like me. But anywho, go and brush your teeth. I know you've been eating sugar. Brush your teeth, and then wash your hands, wash your face, get into your pajamas, give your parents a nice hug and a kiss, tell them you love them, and get into bed. Good night, everybody. Have a great night.